WCNC TV Charlotte. This is Flashpoint, where power and politics collide and the tough questions get asked and answered.
Good Sunday morning. Thanks for joining us here on Flashpoint. I'm Ben Thompson. Apologies that I'm still nursing a cold at this point. Joining me today, former State Representative Tricia Cotham and former Union County GOP Chair Dan Barry, both friends of the program. Been here several times. Thank you both. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
First up, it seems like we do what we always do. We begin with the District 9 primary. Now less than 2 months away. Dan and McCready, we now know, running unopposed on the Democratic ticket. But man, the Republican ticket, it is crowded. 10 Republicans running, some of them well-known, some of them more political newcomers. The man who used to hold the seat, though, if you recall, going back now a few months, Robert Pittenger, decided to throw his support behind former Mecklenburg County Commissioner Matthew Ridenour. Now, this is where the things get really interesting. At the same time he did that, Pittenger started criticizing candidate and current state senator Dan Bishop. He said Bishop was a primary advisor to the Mark Harris campaign and further suggested that Bishop had some knowledge of the election fraud. Bishop quickly firing back, saying in part, "You cannot publish lies about me." Bishop's statements threatens a lawsuit. And then finally, pretty quickly, Pittenger retracted a statement. All right, Dan, I'll start with you. This is all within Republican primary. What is going on?
A good old family feud, I think, is my quote from our convention a couple of weeks ago. 10 candidates. Really, I kind of think of them bifurcated into 3 separate groups.
Yeah.
Really interesting to see Robert's endorsement of Matthew, but it completely wiped out the endorsement because the news story wasn't about the endorsement. Sure. The news story was about his attack on Dan Bishop.
Did it surprise you
that Robert endorsed?
Came out, didn't endorse, but came out so strongly against Bishop.
It's shocking. What that told me is that the Ridenour campaign really was not involved in the drafting of that endorsement, which really questions who's in control of that campaign. A candidate does not allow those kind of things to go out without them approving it in advance.
I know you told me a few weeks ago that this is, I don't want to say your biggest nightmare, but you don't want a lot of bickering between candidates going up to the primary.
The primary candidates, in my opinion, need to differentiate themselves from McCready, not from each other. And if they start going after each other really hard, all we're doing is giving fodder to the Democrats during the general election.
Yeah, well, they sit there and they bicker back and forth. Your guy sitting there by himself now once again and has a war chest that's already been established.
Right. Well, isn't this fun? Pass the popcorn and watch all of this the next few months. Certainly it's going to be interesting to watch who comes ahead in the Republican primary, and I certainly wouldn't bet against anyone. I think there are a lot of strong candidates running, and Dan McCready is certainly looking forward to whoever comes forward and to challenging that individual.
Assuming Dan runs like he did the last time against Mark Harris, he's going to run as a conservative Democrat, centrist Democrat at best. Which of the Republican candidates worries you?
I would say Stoney Rushing. I think that he is very popular in Union County, has deep roots throughout the 9th District. He's an NRA certified instructor. He's been a county commissioner. I know people came out and made fun of him for his so-called boss hog picture. I think that was wrong for them to do that, and I think it really underestimates. Dan Bishop is a phenomenal man. I've enjoyed serving with him and working with him, and he should not be underestimated. And Matthew Ridenour is a good friend, but when you have Senator Bishop and Matthew Ridenour, both from Mecklenburg County, splitting some of that vote. And we have to remember that being from Charlotte and then the way this district expands down into Blade and Robeson County, they're not necessarily liked. It's
not necessarily a positive considered in the rest of the district. Not asking you to endorse someone, but who do you feel like at this point is looking strongest?
I think Stoney clearly had a head start and has a strong base.
Got the endorsement of Mark Harris.
Got the, and weeks in advance.
Yeah.
I would say that Dan Bishop is in that same mix. Right below that, I think you have Matthew Ridenour and Fern Schubert. We hadn't talked about Fern, former state senator, ran for governor, smart woman. And then, you know, my sleepers are Lee Brown and Stevie Rivenbark. And I think people are underestimating impact that non-Mecklenburg County and Union County people have, picking up some, first person to 10,000 people makes it to the runoff, 10,000 votes. So it's going to be really.
And I think it was exciting to see a young mother, veteran Stevie, run and put her name forward.
Yeah.
And I think that's, you know, that can't be missed.
Yeah, I think it's important.
All right, switching gears now. Some of the state's op-ed pages skewering North Carolina Senator Thom Tillis this past week. A few weeks ago, the Republican senator took a bold stand within the GOP ranks, coming out against the president's emergency declaration to build a wall along the Mexico border. But he didn't just say he disagreed. The senator actually wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post, quite possibly the president's least favorite newspaper. But then last week, he stood on the Senate floor and announced, despite his strong feelings about giving the president, any president, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, so much power, he said he had a change of heart. So this week, the Greensboro News and Record publishing a scathing op-ed. It says, quote, "It was not simply a flip-flop, but a belly flop. Read his lips." Obviously, pressure from the White House helped to move Tillis from point A to point Z. Tillis also probably was spooked by threats of a primary challenge in 2020. It goes on to say, even so, as recently as last week, Tillis said he wasn't bothered by primary threats. He was sticking to his guns until he wasn't. Trisha, fair?
I think it is fair. I mean, I was a bit surprised that Tillis would publish this op-ed in the Washington and then switch. I mean, that looks like you are falling into bullying.
You could at least just not go the op-ed route.
Not said anything, lay low, do your vote, and that's it. But when you make this big, strong presence, and then you change, that doesn't look good for anyone.
The first question, I'm assuming the op-ed did not go over well in Republican circles.
No, and I think that you've got to recognize that Thom has had tradition of pushing back on executive authority. And that was from when he was Speaker of the House all the way to his being a member of the U.S. Senate. I also know that there is a process in legislation that is you stake out a hard stance knowing that you're bidding to get some other stuff that you can back off of. I was surprised to see him go so hard. Yeah. And then to see him come back so far tells me he was getting pressure more. Don't think it was coming from the White House as much as it was the party base with the primary coming.
Here in the state, because I mean, you read things, it says that perhaps Mark Meadows and several others were threatening to challenge in the primary because, and we know the system, especially in a state like North Carolina, you got to run to the right and then you got to run in the middle after you get the primary.
I don't think primary challenge goes away. I think that he's going to have a primary.
And why is that?
Wow, I think that he has staked out some pretty moderate positions on the wall. Yeah. Even though he has been a prominent supporter of the president, I think there is an image problem that he has that he's not supported the president. And there are people to his right that think they serve better than he does in the U.S. Senate.
It's funny, and Kay Hagan, who held that spot last time, was criticized for just the same thing. It goes to the point of where we are a purple state. Well, and anybody who was, to your point, the perception is that you're too moderate can hurt you.
And our primary system kowtows to the extremes of both parties.
That's right.
And it makes it hard to move to the center to legislate.
And I think as a former elected official, it's really important to hold the line. If you are going to go out there and put your opinion out there and then you change at the end, then the others know that they've got you. Yep. And they'll keep coming back to bully you or to pressure you. And that's a big flaw I see in a lot of elected officials. And I was surprised and kind of sad to see Tillis do that.
You're a former GOP chair in Union County. I mean, your party leadership. What can change that?
What can change the extremes of the party? I think both parties need to recognize that everybody in their subset has something to offer and to participate in the debate. The challenge we have is the electoral challenge, and I don't know the answer. It's not a redistricting. It's not a nonpartisan districting commission that fixes that. I think it's a broader discussion across the aisle that says we need to lead. And as long as we kowtow to the extremes, we're putting ourselves in a difficult challenge.
Some would say the extremes deserve a voice for sure, but maybe not the loudest voice. And sometimes that's what happens at the primary.
It certainly could be. Let's take a look at the specials in the 3rd and in the 9th. Yeah. This is the extreme of the Republican Party because this is our base that's going to show up in these primaries to vote.
More Flashpoint after this.